Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I will be reviewing one of my all time favorite Ellery Queen novels, The Murderer is a Fox, which is the second in the Wrightsville era of Ellery Queen. You do not need to have read the first, Calamity Town, although that novel does get referenced a lot in this book and is very good, so you should read it. And the Wrightsville novels are like sort of my favorite era of Ellery Queen, where these books become a lot more character based as opposed to the more just like solely on the puzzle, especially when compared to like the nationality titles and the more realistic than the Ellery and LA stories. Not that there isn't a puzzle here, because there is, but the Wrightsville books feel very much in line with like a Christie whodunit. The nationality titles can feel a little too puzzly, to be honest, and the Wrightsville books are just so much more entertaining while keeping the puzzle there. And this is all the start of Ellery's trajectory into him thinking he's God, and he was put on this earth to deliver justice and protect the innocent. We're not quite there in The Murderer is the Fox, but it's starting to happen. And to be fair, Ellery was always kind of like this, but it's going to become a lot more prominent very soon. And I love The Murderer is a Fox. I don't think it gets enough attention, even amongst Queen fans. And I will say, on this reread, I did notice like little teeny tiny issues, very small. Okay, maybe not so small, but I still think this novel is a top tier Ellery Queen novel, one of the cousins' best. As a reminder, I will give a spoiler free summary with commentary up until the point of the murderer reveal, at which time I will warn you it's coming, and from that point forward, spoilers are fair game. And before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. The Murderer is a Fox begins with a little reminiscing of the past. Linda Fox and her parents, Talbot and Emily Fox, are awaiting the return of Davy Fox from Asia. Davy is returning from serving in World War II, and he is coming home to Wrightsville a hero. But as his family awaits his return, Linda remembers the past. Specifically, she remembers two moments. One is from about 10 to 11 years ago, and that was the day Davy came to live with Linda and her parents. Davy is Talbot's nephew, who lived next door to them. Linda does not specify, specifically what happened that day, but she recalls how a 10-year-old Davy was trying very hard not to cry and then started weeping in agony when his Aunt Emily hugged him. This opening chapter is fantastically written. I don't think the cousins ever get enough credit for the quality of their writing. I know I often don't give them enough credit. I mainly focus on their prowess in crafting the puzzles, but they do excellent character work and writing as well. Linda remembers that she and Davy were forbidden to speak about this event, but they sometimes did in secret. And this event affected Davy a lot. He was bullied by the other kids, and it's a huge chip on his shoulder. And this is a very nice touch of continuity from Calamity Town, which is also set in Wrightsville. And in that novel, no, there are no spoilers for Calamity Town in this video either. The townspeople were vicious about scandal. It was a major plot point where the townspeople would just turn on their friends because a murder happened. Mob mentality at play, and this is such a good continuity from that novel, although chronologically, this event from Davy's childhood happened before the events of Calamity Town. And for 10 years, no one spoke openly about this event, although we can get a pretty clear idea of what this event was. The other moment Linda thinks about is the day Davy proposed marriage to her. Yes, Davy is Linda's cousin slash brother, but it's okay because Linda was adopted and they are not blood relatives. No, that's not kidding. That is what they say. I don't think this is okay. It's very strange, but the characters in the book don't mind at all. Very ordeal by innocence of them. Naturally, Talbot and Emily aren't thrilled about their daughter marrying her cousin slash brother, not because they're related, but again, because of this event in Davy's past. Talbot and Emily don't mind it so much, but they realize that Davy is heavily affected by it, and that will cause a rift between husband and wife. Not that the event happened, but the effect of it on Davy is the problem. And we are told here that it's Davy's parents because Uncle Talbot says that children should not be burdened by the sins of their parents. But they consent to the marriage because at the time Davy was on leave before returning to the war and he could have died. But Davy didn't die, and now he's returning home a hero after being in an accident in the war. It's not made like specifically clear what happened, but it definitely sounds like he was shot down over India somewhere. But now there's a further issue. Uncle Talbot has learned that Davy is okay physically, but his nerves are shot. Clearly, Davy has PTSD, but this term is not in use in 1945 and is referred to as a neuropsychiatric casualty, which is a nice way of them trying to brush this under the rug. Davy is also thinking about his past. He's thinking about all the Japanese soldiers he killed and how now he has a taste for killing. He's also thinking about his fellow soldiers who died gruesome deaths. We actually get very graphic descriptions of what happened to some of them. It's not pleasant, but it's probably very accurate. Davy's also thinking about that incident from his past and some unusual mail he received when he was in China. An anonymous person sent him newspaper clippings of things that had been going on in Wrightsville while Davy was away. And all of these clippings are about Davy's wife Linda going to events with the local handsome pharmacist Alvin Kane. Davy is furious about this until he reads a separate letter from Linda where she shares all this information with him, and that calms his nerves. If Linda were having an affair, she wouldn't have written about those things in her letter, so Davy is satisfied. When Davy arrives in Wrightsville, he's completely out of it. He doesn't want to deal with the celebration and people calling him a hero, and he doesn't want to meet all these people. He's so confused when the librarian, Miss Aiken, asks for his autograph for her collection of famous people from Wrightsville, which is apparently a lot of people from this small New England town. Davy and Linda are forced to move into the top floor of Uncle Talbot and Aunt Emily's house because they don't have their own home. Although Davy does now receive his trust fund from his father, Bayard. But Davy is just very lethargic, he doesn't want to do anything, and his family is initially fine to just let him do nothing because the army told them that Davy will be fine once he gets some rest. I'm just really showing how rudimentary the understanding of PTSD is at this time. But it all comes down to the house next door, Davy's home before he moved in with his aunt and uncle. It's still standing, and it's still boarded up, and Davy keeps looking at it. Davy doesn't want to go anywhere. He freaks out at the suggestion that he and Linda go to the movies to see Suspicion by Hitchcock, which, if you know anything about that film, it might give you a hint about what's going on. Also, a really poor suggestion from Linda, considering she does know what's going on. Things really come to a head when Davy and Linda are visited by Miss Aiken, the librarian, the one who collects the signatures, and Emmeline Dupre. Miss Dupre is a returning character. She's back from Calamity Town, and she's the biggest gossip in Wrightsville. She's a terrible person, very mean-spirited, gossiping old woman. Actually, she's not that old, to be honest. And everyone in town calls her the town crier because she just loudly announces this gossip all over the place. The reason for her visit is extremely convoluted, but basically, Miss Aiken wants a signature from a long-dead resident named Shockley Wright, but the only person in town who has it is Alvin Kane. And because Linda is such good friends with Alvin Kane, maybe she can convince Alvin to give her the signature for Miss Aiken, for her collection. The implication here being that Linda is having an affair with Alvin. Davy gets extremely angry, accuses Emmy Dupre of mailing him those newspaper clippings, to which she denies, and throws them out of the house. Linda is shocked at Davy's behavior, and the following day, Davy does the same thing when Alvin Kane himself visits the house, and he too, characterizes this innocent dance he and Linda had as being something more sinister, and that visit goes the same as the other. Davy has also been having nightmares, and the cousins write these passages so beautifully as well. It's really awe-striking just how beautifully the cousins depict violence in this book, but Davy constantly has this nightmare where he's swimming in blood with his fellow soldiers, and they're being chased by the Japanese and Alvin Kane. Alvin Kane is on the side of the Japanese in this nightmare, and when Davy wakes up, he has a sudden urge to strangle Linda. And one night, this actually does happen. He cannot resist the urge to strangle her, but she does fight him off. He does not kill her. And Davy describes it as he doesn't have control over his hands. He doesn't want to strangle Linda, but he can't help it. Linda and Davy keep this a secret from her parents, but they're at a loss of what to do. They obviously can't go on living like this. Davy doesn't want to see a doctor, and the army is basically totally useless here. And, they just say Davy will get over it. But as Davy realizes, the real problem isn't what happened in China and India, it's what happened in his childhood. Linda has this idea that they should consult someone who had previously assisted in a dramatic case in Wrightsville, and that person would be young mystery writer Ellery Queen. And I should say, this book has a lot of continuity with Calamity Town, published 3 years prior. There are a lot of crossover characters, all of whom are minor in both novels, and plenty of references are made to Calamity Town, but that book is not spoiled in this one. I don't think you need to read Calamity Town before The Murderer is a Fox, but I would recommend it. And also, Calamity Town is just very good, so you should read it anyway. But Ellery is baffled when Linda and Davy visit him in New York. Ellery is not a psychiatrist, so he feels unable to help him, although, to be honest, that's never stopped Ellery in the past, and it won't in the future. But then Davy reveals what's really bothering him. It's something I think the reader probably guessed by this point, and that's when Davy was 10 years old, his father murdered his mother. And since then, Davy has always felt that he too would grow up to murder his wife one day, that the sins of the father are passed down to the son. And Linda asks Ellery to investigate Davy's mother's murder because if his father can be proved innocent, that means Davy won't be a murderer. And for all this book's strengths, and there are many, this talk of inheriting a murder gene is a little icky, in my opinion. This is a very common theme written by many authors in the Golden Age. I also think perhaps there's a bit trying to justify the violence Davy commits against Linda because Davy's father, Bayard, is accused of poisoning his wife, Jessica, while Davy tried to strangle Linda. Those are two very different types of actions, and this is still the spoiler-free section, but, maybe that's a clue. But Ellery does agree to help Davy and Linda because he likes the challenge. No one actually thinks Bayard Fox is innocent. The case was very clear-cut, and there's no one else even in consideration for murderer. However, before Davy left for the war, he visited his father in prison for the first and only time, and Bayard told Davy that he was innocent. In fact, Bayard has always maintained his innocence, although he stopped fighting the charges a long time ago. Ellery sees his father and Sergeant Velly, who put him in connection with the powers that be, and somehow, with minimal effort, Ellery managed to get Bayard Fox temporarily released into his custody, although he will be followed by Sergeant Howie, who's this absolutely enormous police officer, even bigger than Velly. And Bayard is just completely defeated as a man, and the prison warden thinks Bayard is guilty, but he does tell Ellery that something isn't right here. Inspector Dakin, also returning from Calamity Town, says that he's not actually worried about Bayard making a run for it, but he's more worried about the townspeople killing Bayard because the town has angry mob mentality. Ellery brings Bayard and Sergeant Howie, and they're going to live with Talbot and Emily and Linda and Davy. This first encounter is very awkward, as you can imagine. Bayard doesn't say anything. He has nothing to say, really. And although Ellery notices there's like a coldness between Bayard and his brother Talbot, he describes it as inexplicable, which, there's a clear explanation for this, but anyway. Everyone goes over to the Fox house, the old Fox house, where Bayard and Jessica and Davy lived. And it's frozen in time. Nothing has been touched in 12 years. And the cousins write, the house screamed after being awakened. It was a very chilling and eerie description. But there's nothing immediately useful in the house. Bayard keeps staring at an Afghan blanket, which prompts Ellery to ask him about it. Here, we finally learn more details about Jessica's murder. Jessica was always a sick woman, but in the months before her death, she had pneumonia and required the aid of 2 nurses until Bayard abruptly fired them to take care of his wife himself. This required Talbot to manage the brothers' machine parts business by himself, which Talbot is very clearly bitter about. On the day before she died, which we're told was June 14th, 1932, and had I remembered that date, I would have saved this review for that week, but anyway, this was the first day Jessica felt well enough to move around on her own. However, she wouldn't eat anything, and this concerned Bayard, who did eventually manage to convince her to drink some grape juice. It's also mentioned that on this day, Talbot visited Bayard before going to work. This event was mentioned at Bayard's trial, but was deemed insignificant, and everyone thinks so until Bayard says he promised to tell the truth because he wants to help Davy, and he's not going to hide it anymore. And then Emily just shouts out, the other man. And we get all of this backstory in a very interesting but piecemeal way, which forces me to sort of lump this all together in a summary here. But Bayard's motive for murdering Jessica was that she was seeing another man. There didn't appear to be any evidence of this, but this is what the prosecution came up with. And this alleged other man was never identified, but everyone just collectively realizes that the other man did exist, and it was Talbot. And Bayard confronted him about this. And this is what they decided on the day before Jessica died. They would let Jessica decide which brother she wanted to be with, and the losing brother would sell his half of the business and move away. And I find this scene very funny, although I think it's unintentionally funny, but Emily decides this very serious moment is the time to start having an argument with her husband over this, and she claims she didn't know about it, only to very quickly reveal that she did in fact know about this affair, and she's just mad no one ever told her about it. She's not mad that it happened. But the conversation quickly turns to the mechanics of the murder. Jessica was poisoned with digitalis in her grape juice. And although we were led to believe no one but Bayard could have poisoned Jessica, we do learn that both Talbot and Emily were in the house on the day Jessica was poisoned. Jessica was poisoned on the 14th and died on the 15th, and Talbot was actually hanging around the pitcher and tumbler the grape juice was served in, while Emily was basically running around the house unsupervised. The grape juice had to be delivered that morning, so it couldn't have been poisoned beforehand, and the digitalis came from Jessica's heart medication, and the bottle was, quote, mostly full, unquote. So this is what the brothers agreed upon. This is what everybody agreed happened. Talbot and Bayard had their conversation about Jessie while they waited for the grape juice to be delivered. When it was, Bayard took 2 purple glass tumblers from the cabinet and the pitcher from the same set. He rinsed one of the tumblers and the pitcher in the sink, and he said he always did this because he and Davy always did the dishes, and they weren't particularly good at cleaning, so he always rinsed them before he used them again. Bayard poured the grape juice into the rinsed tumbler and poured that into the pitcher. Despite it being called grape juice, it actually sounds like it's grape concentrate that you have to add water to make juice to. But anyway, he performed that action twice. He then added water from the tap to the pitcher and then added ice. Lab results proved that the juice, the tap water, and the ice were all clear of poison. During this event, Alvin Kane arrived to deliver a bottle of aspirin Bayard ordered. At the time, Alvin Kane was the then clerk at the pharmacy he now owns, and he got into a fight with Bayard over this because Bayard had just ordered a 100-bottle tablet of aspirin that has since gone missing. But the police didn't think this mattered because Jessie didn't die by aspirin overdose. Alvin Kane left, and Bayard rinsed the second tumbler in the sink. Talbot then left for work. So everything from this point forward, we only have Bayard's word for. And we know for sure nothing has been poisoned yet, or at least that is what the evidence indicates. Bayard then said he brought the pitcher of grape juice and the second glass into the living room for Jessica. Jessica did not drink it right away, but Bayard and her remained in the living room together. Then Jessica reached for the tumbler, but because she was so weak, she dropped it and the glass broke. Bayard and Jessica then went into the kitchen where Jessica grabbed a third glass tumbler from the cabinet and poured the grape juice into that. So the only time anyone other than Bayard could have poisoned anything was when the pitcher was left alone in the living room. But apparently no one could have done that either, according to Emily and 2 other people who were watching the front door at the time, and they could actually see the events happen in the living room from their outside garden. Things seem pretty hopeless here, but Ellery is not one to be deterred. He visits Dr. Willoughby, who attended to Jessica during her illness, and he tells Ellery that Jessica's murder really bothered him these past 12 years. Ellery thinks he's finally onto something, but no. Dr. Willoughby is just concerned because not because he thinks Bayard is innocent, but because he himself misdiagnosed Jessica. He didn't realize Jessica was being poisoned by digitalis. He just thought her illness had relapsed. And this is where we learn that Jessica lived for almost a day after she drank the grape juice, which opens the possibility she was poisoned at some other point, but Dr. Willoughby shoots that down. And for all this book's strengths, and there are many, I think one frustrating aspect is that there's always this constant, like, but wait, there's more thing going on. There's a constant interruption to inform Ellery that some other event happened, when all of this should have been presented at one time. It's not like a new revelation that characters are figuring out for the first time. It gets frustrating, and I understand not wanting an info dump, but it does get a bit much, perhaps, in the other direction, that maybe like a little bit of an info dump would have been okay. That night, Ellery dreams about Jessica Fox, but this is interrupted by a flashing light. Someone broke into Bayard Fox's home. Ellery attempts to chase the intruder, but he is knocked out because he was foolishly wearing a glow-in-the-dark watch, which made him visible in the darkness. Ellery calls Chief Inspector Dakin to assist, and they discover someone broke into what used to be Bayard's den, and Jimmy'd opened a locked drawer. Bayard cannot remember what was in that drawer, but doesn't think it was anything too important. We also get this like hilarious scene with Sergeant Howie sleeping in one-piece underwear and bragging about how Bayard couldn't have gotten away from him, only for Bayard to say, yeah, he could have, which is like, why are you saying this? But for now, Ellery has no idea who broke into the house. But this event does give a little bit of a glimmer of hope of proving Bayard innocent, because why now? Why all of a sudden is someone trying to steal something from Bayard's old desk? It's because suddenly the case isn't so settled anymore. But just when things are starting to look up for Bayard and Davy, things get very bad very quickly. The following day, Ellery is strolling through Wrightsville when he is accosted and abducted by Miss Aiken and Emmy Dupre. They drag poor Ellery into Miss Sally's tea shop, and this is one of those little scenes that lives just rent-free in my head all the time, and specifically the food they are eating. And normally in mystery novels, we have these descriptions of lavish feasts and buffets, and the food is so succulent and delicious, and here we get the exact opposite. The food is repulsive to Ellery, and perhaps this is a bit classist because Ellery is the New York City cosmopolitan and Wrightsville is constantly described as a backwater hick town, but the food Miss Aiken and Miss Dupre have ordered is, quote, creamed chicken patties, Waldorf salad garni with ersatz whipped cream. Ersatz meaning the whipped cream is fake and made from mayonnaise, which I personally think mayonnaise is the most repulsive food in existence. And my personal favorite dish here for dessert, a pineapple marshmallow nut mousse, which is Miss Sally's specialty. None of these food choices are relevant to the plot, but whenever I think of Ellery Queen, I always think of pineapple marshmallow nut mousse. But anyway, Alvin Kane finally called Miss Dupre to let her know that he has agreed to let Miss Aiken have that signature of Shockley Wright from his pharmacy record. Miss Aiken has the book, and although the signature she needs is from 1925, she snooped around in the 1930s, and she found a signature from Bayard Fox after he signed for a prescription of Jessica's digitalis a week before she died. This is pretty damning because Jessica wasn't supposed to be taking digitalis at that point. Her doctor took her off of it. Bayard has no explanation for this. He claims he never picked up the prescription, but handwriting analysis proves that the signature is his. In the Queen novel, just before this one, There Was an Old Woman, which is also an excellent novel, Ellery used handwriting analysis of a very similar nature, and it reminded me a lot of this scene. Chief Inspector Dakin is angry because this new evidence is pretty damning for Bayard, and he thinks Ellery just wasted his time, even going as far as to say Bayard should have been fried had this evidence been known at the time. And remember, this is a US-based novel, so the capital punishment is the electric chair, not hanging like it is in Britain. And Davy's getting ready to pack his bags and leave. Linda is all upset, but Ellery does not give up hope. The break-in still hasn't been explained, which could help Bayard. Ellery pays a visit to Judge Eli Martin, also returning from Calamity Town, and Judge Martin has a reputation as a fair and principled man, as we saw in that previous novel. He was also a personal friend of Bayard Fox. And like Ellery, Judge Martin doesn't really have a firm belief about whether or not Bayard murdered Jessica or not. However, he doesn't like the way Bayard was convicted. Basically, it was all circumstantial evidence. Judge Martin has a problem because the police never proved Bayard poisoned Jessica. They only merely proved that he was the only one who could. not that he actually did. And Judge Martin also tells Ellery that Bayard was madly in love with Jessica and even left her everything in his will, which the judge looked over one night. This gives Ellery an idea that the item that was stolen from Bayard's desk was a will, which Bayard remembers when prompted. Ellery meets with Dakin and Chief Prosecutor Hendricks to discuss this newest piece of evidence. As Ellery reasons, it doesn't make any sense for anyone to steal Bayard's will for a number of reasons. One, they could have stolen it at any time in the past 12 years, so why now? Two, the will is null because Bayard outlived the only named heir in it, which was Jessica. And three, Bayard doesn't even have an estate anymore because upon imprisonment, he legally signed over his estate to Davy, which was held in trust until Davy became an adult. So why would anyone steal this old useless will? And this is such a good clue here. I mean, Ellery says that someone wanted Bayard's signature from that will to forge the entry into the pharmaceutical register. And the only person who could have done that is Alvin Kane because he's the only person who had access to the register. And why would Alvin Kane all of a sudden agree to give the register to Miss Aiken when she had been asking for years and Kane refused to even give her the time of day? Moreover, Alvin Kane actually called Emily Dupre to tell her Miss Aiken could have the register, so he didn't even just relent when Miss Aiken asked. And it's pretty obvious to Ellery that it's Alvin Kane who broke into the house, stole the will, and then forged Bayard's name into the register. When confronted, Alvin Kane freaks out, kicks over a table, and has this huge villainous breakdown. He admits that, yeah, he broke into Bayard's old house, and he wanted the signature so he could send Bayard back to prison. That would force Davy to leave Linda, and then Alvin could swoop in and marry her. So that solves all that. I mean, things aren't as bad for Bayard now that he didn't sign the poison register, but the break-in is also solved, and that didn't help. Ellery now wants to look at the picture and the tumbler. The police mailed it back to Bayard's house after the trial, where Talbot put it in the attic before sealing up the house. Ellery finds it there alongside some of Davy's old toys, like his football, his chemistry set, his erector set. That misplaced bottle of aspirin is also found amongst the toys. And this is the one part of the novel I think is a bit of a stretch. Ellery notices that there is a line of sediment inside the pitcher where the grape juice must have settled for a long time. The cousins even have this odd addendum at the end of this chapter explaining why there's only one line of sediment instead of two. I have no idea if this is part of the original story or something that was added into later editions. It feels like it was added into later editions, but I only have a more recent edition, so I don't know. But the cousins are always very clear on their plot mechanics, and this is proof of that. They went the extra mile to explain it here. And using the tumbler as a measure, Ellery realizes that there were 2 glasses of grape juice taken out of the pitcher, not one, as previously assumed. Because Jessica said she only drank 1 glass of grape juice before she died, it remains to be seen who had the other. It couldn't be Bayard, because Talbot called him out of the house for a business meeting. That also rules out Talbot. Davy and Linda were at school. Emily, I suppose, is a possibility, but she doesn't get mentioned as such. And the Foxes and Ellery try to figure out who, if anyone, could have visited Jessica during that 2 hours when Bayard was out of the house, and why that person never came forward during the trial. Because no one else in Wrightsville fell sick with digitalis poisoning, one can assume that the visitor is not a local. Using the train times and the death of the only cab driver in town, the Foxes realizes that an old friend of Jessica's who lives in Montreal may have stopped by. Emily remembers Jessica having this friend who was a famous singer named Gabrielle Bonaire, and the train to Montreal did stop in Wrightsville that day instead of simply passing through like it normally does. So it's very possible this woman visited Jessica. Ellery tracks her down, and she agrees to come to Wrightsville. And before she gets to Wrightsville, I have to warn you, this is the end of the spoiler-free section. Back out now if you don't want to be spoiled. You've been warned. And just as Ellery suspected, Gabrielle Bonaire did visit her friend Jessica the day she was poisoned. This was an impromptu visit Gabrielle made when she learned her train back to Montreal stopped in Wrightsville and that she could take a later train back home. And guess what? Gabrielle did drink the grape juice. According to her, Jessica offered her the grape juice, and Gabrielle accepted. Gabrielle went into the kitchen, grabbed a fourth purple tumbler from the cabinet, and poured the juice from the pitcher. Because Gabrielle never fell ill, this proved the digitalis was not in the pitcher, and everyone celebrates because this clears Bayard, which I think is another issue. I mean, and as usual, I have a theory on this. I'll get to that in a minute. Bayard actually gets pardoned instead of having another trial for simplicity's sake, but this doesn't explain how Jessica died or who killed her. The poison had to be in the glass Jessica drank out of. Why no one thinks Bayard didn't poison her glass is quite frankly insane to me, and that's my theory for later, but everyone is so eager for an explanation, so Ellery has to tell them the truth. Jessica committed suicide. Torn between Bayard and Talbot, she took her own life because she didn't want to wreck either family, and she was unsure of her feelings. Bayard insists this is not possible. In fact, his defense tried to push the suicide at his trial, and Bayard insisted it wasn't possible. But Ellery says it is possible, and despite spending all day with Jessica, there were times when Bayard was away from her for a few brief periods of time, and when he was at work for 2 hours. Everyone is thrilled with this revelation, which is a bit odd, I guess, but I guess it's preferable to the other. Later that night, Bayard corners Ellery alone and demands the real explanation. He insists Jessica didn't kill herself. She would never do that. And Ellery continues to push this theory, but Bayard counters with this letter Gabrielle brought with her. When Gabrielle visited, she asked Jessica to travel to Montreal with her, but Jessica declined. Then, after she fell sick again, but before she died, Jessica wrote a letter to Gabrielle saying that she had changed her mind and that she would visit her in Montreal and that she had, quote, made a decision, unquote, implying that she had picked between Talbot and Bayard, though she doesn't say which one. And those are not the words of a woman who committed suicide. She's making future plans. Ellery counters this and said that Jessica probably assumed her suicide attempt failed because she had been feeling better before she died. We also get this weird explanation from Gabrielle about why she never came forward. She was called away immediately on a tour of South America and then Europe. And while she was in Europe, she was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp for promoting the arts. And when she learned about Jessica's death, she didn't think anything of it. She didn't know Jessica had been poisoned the day Gabrielle visited her. But Bayard still isn't buying this, and Ellery finally relents. He tells Bayard the actual truth. Jessica didn't commit suicide. She was killed by Davy, and it was an accident. And these are very clever mechanics here. I mean, the cousins always do brilliant mechanics. The digitalis was already in the glass when Jessica took it out of the cabinet. Remember how Bayard always rinsed the glasses and the plates before using them because neither he nor Davy were good at doing the dishes? Yeah, Davy used that glass as part of his chemistry set. The aspirins were found in the chemistry set, which proved to Ellery that Davy would take medication out of the medicine cabinet and perform experiments with them with his chemistry set. Because Davy was a 10-year-old boy, he didn't clean glasses very well, if at all. So Davy put the digitalis in that tumbler, performed his experiments, and then returned the glass to the cabinet without cleaning it very well. When Jessica dropped her glass, she went to the cabinet to get another one. Because Jessica, she didn't know she should be rinsing the glasses after taking them out of the cabinet, like Bayard would have. The glass, we're told, is dark, opaque purple, which makes it even harder to see the digitalis. Ellery didn't want to tell anyone the truth because he was worried it would get back to Davy, and Davy is very fragile mentally, and he wouldn't be able to handle the truth. Because Davy was young at the time, the details of the case were withheld from him, and now 12 years later, he simply doesn't remember playing with the chemistry set. So now Bayard has to remain on his toes for the rest of his life so Davy doesn't find out the truth. And there is a theme in this book about sweeping things under the rug. A lot of things are kept quiet, including Davy's other mental health issues that have been as a result of the war. And as I mentioned, I have a theory about this book, and again, this is not canon, so when I discuss and critique the book, this theory is not playing a factor. But my theory is that Bayard really did kill Jessica, and Ellery knows this. Ellery is very much the type of person who cares more about the future of Davy and Linda than he does about Jessica. Ellery's concern is always on the living, and while he is never one to brush away unpleasant truths from even his closest friends, Ellery does think of himself as a god or a godlike figure who can do what he wants in the pursuit of some grand master plan. And because he's more concerned about Davy and Linda's future and happiness, he will do anything to make that happen. Let's examine the evidence for this. Bayard is not cleared just because the poison wasn't in the pitcher. We only have Bayard's testimony about what happened that afternoon once Talbot left. We have no idea what really happened, and Bayard is basically free to say whatever he wants about that time. There's no proof for any of it. He could have poisoned the glass for sure. In Jessica's letter to Gabrielle, she hints she doesn't like her husband. And while she never states which of the brothers she has picked, I do sort of get the impression she picked Talbot because she wanted to get away for a while. And perhaps she suspected Bayard tried to poison her. She wrote that she did make up her mind. And why all of a sudden did she make a decision? She's been torn between the two for months. Did she suspect she was poisoned by Bayard? Also, we have Bayard's own behavior. Like, Bayard is never concerned for his own well-being, but only Davy's. Why? Because of his own behavior has this tremendous effect on Davy. He wants Davy to be okay. Accepting the answer given by Ellery at the end of the novel as true, that means the cousins have left a plot hole, and they would never do that. The cousins always explain everything, and they think of everything. It's extremely unlikely to me they left a plot hole like that in the novel. It's so unlike them. And now for praise. This is one of my favorite Ellery Queen novels. The characters are truly spectacular. These are definitely some of the best characters in any Queen novel, if not the best. We are operating with a very small cast here. Outside of the recurring characters, it's just the 6 Foxes, the 5 plus Jessica, and I guess Alvin Kane. Sergeant Howie is not really a prominent character, and every character in this novel is spectacular. And I will go more in depth when I get to their individual character sections, but even the minor characters, who I may not be talking about, feel fully fleshed out. I mean, we had a scene with a minor character who was this delivery boy 12 years prior, and we learned so much about him, despite the fact that he's only on like 2 pages max. And he's also black, and he has a name, which it might seem strange I'm pointing this out, but in earlier Ellery Queen novels, often the black characters did not have names. They were just referred to as like the Negro or worse, so big improvement here. And they all feel so alive and real, these characters. I mean, this book has a lot in common with Agatha Christie's Five Little Pigs. And, considering how many, Christie fans their cousins were, and a lot of Christie fans consider this her best novel. And I would say it's spectacular. I wouldn't say it's Five Little Pigs is the best. But, another excellent point here is both, the continuity this novel has with Calamity Town, and also its independence from it. It doesn't seem like those two things would go together, but this novel fits so nicely after Calamity Town. I mentioned many of the continuity points already, like the mob mentality of the town, and we have some minor recurring characters like Emmy Dupre and Miss Aiken, and we have lots of mentions of past characters who don't appear. The Wright family gets mentioned a lot, and nothing is spoiled. You don't have to read Calamity Town. There's also continuity with There's an Old Woman, which is not a Wrightsville novel, but is the one directly before this book. I think the setting is near perfect. The cousins do not rely on us remembering Wrightsville from Calamity Town to set the scene of of Wrightsville. Calamity Town was 3 years prior, so they need to describe it again. The description of Wrightsville extends beyond just like the physical characteristics of the town and its people. It's the culture of the town as well, and it lines so consistently with the description in Calamity Town without it being a rehash. The scene in Miss Sally's tea shop is just so perfect to me. Whenever someone mentions Ellery Queen, one of my first thoughts is of Ellery staring at the pineapple marshmallow nut mousse and Miss Dupre sticking him with a check for the food he didn't even eat. The writing is spectacular. I always remember the house screaming when the door is opened for the first time in 12 years. There are some great plot mechanics here. I mean, the fact that Bayard and Davy are bad at washing dishes appears to just be a fun character moment for them, but it's a clue. and Ellery's deductions about the break-in and Alvin Kane stealing the will and his sudden turnabout with the pharmacy register over Miss Aiken are so genius and delightful. Those are the kinds of clues that are really so simple to deduce, but the reader is going to completely miss. And I also want to talk about the time setting here. This is the end of World War II, and this time is so perfect for this novel in particular. Like, I think you can interpret this book's overall theme two ways. I think the more obvious textual way is the cousins are saying, look, the war was horrific, but it was necessary, and it's ending, and things will improve from here. Davy's problems are not caused by the war at all. The war is not to blame. And I think this one makes sense because the cousins were extremely patriotic. I mean, at one point they had Ellery writing propaganda work in the 30s. They were considered, one of the pillars of American masculinity at the time. Like, I think it's hard to remember today how popular Ellery Queen was in the 30s. They were the biggest literary thing in the United States. And it would be in their nature to prop up this patriotic sentiment and justify the war and knock down critics. On the other hand, I think you can interpret this the other way, that the cousins are criticizing the U.S. government here. It's mentioned repeatedly that the army says Davy is fine, and Davy is clearly not fine. Like, they say he just needs rest, and while PTSD studies were very rudimentary at best in the 40s, it does seem quite clear the cousins aren't really buying this excuse that he just needs to rest. The suggestion there's nothing wrong with Davy that the army makes repeatedly is treated extremely derisively. And also, there's a theme of here sweeping things under the rug. The truth about Jessica's death is swept under the rug. Ellery lies about what happened to everyone but Bayard. You can't help but to make the comparison to Ellery, doing that the idea the military is covering up the horrors of war by sweeping them under the rug rather than admit there's something wrong with Davy and thousands of others. And I think this push-pull argument here is very well depicted. It's extremely subtle, and sort of both sides, there's evidence to support both of these contradictory themes here. I am generally curious. Let me know in the comments what you think about how you interpret this, because it's really up in the air for me. And I hate to admit it, but, being honest here, there are little tiny things wrong with this novel. I've read this book so many times before, and this is really the first time I've noticed some of these issues as affecting the plot. I mean, mainly the biggest issue is the ending solution, and this is super strange. Like, off the top of my head, I cannot think of another mystery novel that has this problems. I'm sure if I really sat down and thought of it, I could. But, usually with plot holes, it winds up the plot solution could not work as laid out because of the plot hole. There's something that doesn't work, and then it doesn't make sense. Here, the solution works. The solution is completely credible. The problem is the cousins do not eliminate all other options. And this is very odd, especially for them, because they always go through painstaking detail all the time in their other novels to make sure this doesn't happen. But I fully believe Ellery's solution that Jessica was poisoned because Davy didn't wash out the glass completely. However, the solution as presented does not rule out Bayard as a murderer. He absolutely had plenty of opportunity to poison Jessica, especially since most of what happened that day is told to us by Bayard, and only he was present with Jessica for most of the day. It also does not rule out Gabrielle as the murderer. She could have poisoned Jessica. Emily could have poisoned Jessica once Bayard left the house. The other possible options are not ruled out, and this is a flaw. And I think there's, an aspect of this novel that's like an infomercial, where it's like, but wait, there's more to the original story. And I don't necessarily mind that, but it does get frustrating that there's more to the already established story we weren't told about that isn't new information to the characters. There are a few hard to swallow coincidences. The fact the sediment line is still on the picture is very strange to me. It's convenient. The fact that Jessica never told anyone Gabrielle visited is convenient. Gabrielle's taxi driver dying is convenient. Gabrielle never mentioning her visit is convenient, although it is explained convincingly. Like, I don't have a problem with that. Gabrielle herself is a bit of a deus ex machina, a literary technique where someone or something is dropped in conveniently to solve everything out of nowhere. I don't like that strategy. It's a bit of a cop out. Although I did like the scenes here. It didn't feel cheap, when reading it, but I still have to call it out. This mystery is solvable. However, I wish the chemistry set was mentioned more often. It is literally mentioned one time before Ellery reveals its importance. And while that's a fun clue that you have to be paying attention closely to, I do wish it was mentioned more often. The aspirin are found there, which is how we're supposed to make the connection that Davy experimented with medications from the house. That works, but again, I just wish there was something mentioned of Davy playing with the chemistry so that it never gets mentioned at all. And I think the romantic relationship between Davy and Linda is weird. They are cousins, they're adopted brother and sister. It's weird. And when I ranked every Ellery Queen novel, I had The Murderer is a Fox, number 3 of 33 Queen novels. And I sort of forced to lower that. I would probably lower that maybe just one spot, so it's below the finishing stroke. To be honest, I think it might have to be dropped a little lower, but I love this book too much. It's still a top tier mystery novel. Never mind, like, just out of the Ellery Queens, just like out of the mystery novels of the Golden Era in general, this is one of my favorites. But it is frustrating, some of these coincidences. It's also frustrating we have some unanswered questions, like who sent Davy those newspaper clippings when he was in the war. It was probably Alvin Kane, we're never told. But no matter what, I still think this is a superior Queen title. I've knocked Christie for this a lot, especially in Five Little Pigs. There's another comparison here between the two, where an author sometimes goes full throttle on the characters and the overall plot, that sometimes the murder mechanics either don't work, or in the case of Five Little Pigs or The Murderer is a Fox, could have worked better. These are not the cousin's best mystery mechanics. Like, Five Little Pigs is not Christie's best murder mechanics. And I think you could argue, although I wouldn't necessarily do so, that this novel is inappropriately depicting domestic violence and excusing Davy's behavior and actions toward Linda. I personally don't think that's the case, and I wouldn't argue such, but I do think that's a reasonable thing to believe. Also, and I do not hold this against the novel in any way, but I think the title is pretty bad. I know it's a play on words and like how sly foxes are, but it's both misleading and a spoiler. There is no true murderer here, and nor is anyone acting like truly slyly, in the way you would expect. And it also spoils the culprit is a member of the Fox family, which I guess it had to be anyway, but... And just one last thing here is that contemporary reviews of this novel were very similar to my own here. The critics loved the novel, but criticized the solution. They called the solution thin. I have to disagree with that characterization. I think the solution is good and strong. I don't think it's thin at all. It's just that the other options haven't been eliminated. It's not that the solution presented doesn't work or is uninteresting. I think that's totally wrong. And this doesn't really bother me, but I know some people get mad when the mystery novel doesn't actually have a murder in it, like The Murderer is a Fox. There is no murder in this book. Again, that doesn't really bother me, so I don't hold it against it. As long as the puzzle and the mystery is strong, I don't care if it turns out to be like a suicide or an accident or whatever. Again, I know that's technically one of the rules of detective fiction, that it has to be murder, but again, it doesn't really bother me any. Let's move on to our individual characters, starting with our hero, Ellery Queen. I know some critics at the time thought Ellery was out of place here, and this novel should have been a standalone. I would disagree. I agree this isn't a strong novel necessarily for character moments for Ellery, but again, the comparison to Five Little Pigs comes into play, where that's also a novel not great for character moments for Poirot, and it's because the story isn't about Ellery. This is a story about the Fox family, and Ellery is the interlocutor of sorts who comes in to save the day. It's not about him, and despite that, I think Ellery does still have some great moments. I mean, his deduction skills are on par, as always. Do I have to bring up the scene in Miss Sally's tea shop again. We see him not only remembering people like Judge Martin, but also going to meet with them and still commanding the respect of these people like Judge Martin, like Inspector Dakin. It's not everybody who's going to convince the police to release a convicted murderer into his custody. And this novel is just one of a few that plays into the Wrightsville saga of Ellery Queen, with the town really having this effect on Ellery's thoughts and emotions. It's almost as if Wrightsville is a mythological village. It's a town that's always drawing him in. He can never get away from it. And admittedly, The Murderer is a Fox is probably the one that preys on him the least. I mean, far so than like Double Double or like 10 Days Wonder or Calamity Town. No, wait, this is probably the only Wrightsville novel that has an entirely happy ending. I mean, usually it's more of a mixed result at the end, but I did enjoy Ellery here. He had a fun character moments, good detective moments, and served the role he was supposed to. We technically don't have a murderer here, but I'll talk about Davy in this position anyway. This is where I would normally cover the killer. And I thought Davy was a fantastic character. He was written so well. I think his constant moodiness just can't be explained by just solely the belief his father is a killer or the effect of the war upon him. It's both. And the cousins do such a good job depicting this. They solve the one aspect of this they can solve and leave the other alone, but because there's nothing they can do about it. But I think the opening scenes with Davy, of him just like dreading returning home and wanting nothing to do with the parade and all that, it's just so well depicted. And his nightmares are very graphic, and the cousins spare nothing in writing those scenes. They are very vivid. Now, I think Davy does become a little one note once Ellery shows up. He just doesn't have a lot to do once the investigation begins, and his story is just basically one of melancholy for a while. I think selecting him as the culprit, it's weird to say murderer here, is an interesting choice. It's definitely a surprise, I think, for the reader, who would be shocked if anyone saw this coming. But I think also from the perspective of the cousins, it's sort of an indication of Davy as both a careless individual who's blameless, but also one who, yeah, you know what, does deserve some of the blame here. Like, Davy didn't intentionally or knowingly kill his mother, but now he's someone who has to be watched. It sort of lingers that he's potentially dangerous because he's careless and because of the effects of the war on him. It's really fascinating as a character because he is a hero, but he's not these typical war heroes you would see depicted in the early 1940s, that there's totally blameless figures. That's not what's going on here. On to our victim, Jessica Fox, and even though Jessica's dead, and we never meet her on the page, we learn so much about her. In some ways, she's a very traditional victim, sort of like the sickly, bedridden figure torn between two men whose existence is causing a bit of consternation for someone. I think she was very well developed, but I do wish she was even more developed. I think she's a great character, and we get the sense of who she is, but I wanted more. Like, I really don't have an inkling over which brother she ultimately chose. There's not a lot there for us to make an educated guess. I mean, I would say she picked Talbot, but there's no real evidence for that. It's also very strange that at no point does she ever seem concerned about Davy. This is very Caroline Crail. I mean, the Five Little Pigs comparisons continue. Because the deal the brothers made was that if Jessica chose Talbot, Bayard would move away with Davy. And again, this might play into some weird, like, mommy issues that we do occasionally see in Ellery Queen novels. Ellery himself, does not have a mother. We don't really know anything about her. It's just the father for the whole run. A lot of psychological issues stemming from mommy in some Queen novels. But overall, I did enjoy Jessica. I felt she came to life, and I think we got to know who she was, but I do wish she could have been even better. The potential was there. And we have Uncle Talbot Fox, who, again, another great character. I really like the sort of unconventional approach the cousins had with the relationship between Talbot and Bayard. Not that it's unconventional, but I think it's unexpected. There's no, like, sentimental reunion between the two brothers, but there isn't this, like, overt clash either. Like, as far as we know, Talbot never visited Bayard in prison, and there's a chill between them. And initially you think it's because of Jessica, but that Talbot is angry that Bayard took Jessica away from him, and that's certainly part of it, but their rivalry seems to extend even beyond Jessica. The business seems to be a big part of it, we're told that whenever Bayard talks about the business or how he like stepped away to take care of Jessica, that Talbot would roll his eyes or groan or make a face. The first thing Talbot did after Bayard was convicted was to remove Bayard's name from the business. There's this sentiment that Talbot was burned by Bayard's very existence, and there's this one-sided resentment. Like Talbot definitely feels burdened. Like, oh, now I have to raise Davy. Oh, now I got to take care of the business by myself. Oh, you took away the woman I loved. And even after Bayard is cleared, we never get any reconciliation or even like appreciation for Bayard from his brother. The coolness is going to remain for the foreseeable future. And next we have Aunt Emily, and I remember thinking Emily was the murderer the very first time I read this book. It was mostly through process of elimination. I thought that, but I wasn't really considering Davy as a suspect. And I liked Emily. I really enjoyed the potentially unintentional humor she brought. She picks the worst moments to get into fights with Talbot, and I really loved how she was just so mad over Talbot's affair with Jessica, not because it happened, but because just simply no one told her about it. And once it's made public, she's still not even that mad, but she just acts mad because she thinks that's how she's supposed to act. But the truth is, there just like isn't like a mean or like vindictive bone in her. And that's the first thing we learn of her when we see her for the first time. We told how Linda remembers Davy crying into her arms when he first moved in, which really should have been an indication that she was innocent. She's never really presented as a suspect, even though she technically really shouldn't have been ruled out. I mean, she was alone in the house, unsupervised, and she was just outside in the garden when Jessica was mostly alone for after Bayard left. So she really should have been a suspect, but again, she's never really treated as such. But anyway, I thought she was a fun character. And of course, we have Bayard, who completes the love triangle of Bayard, Jessica, Talbot. And, it's said that Talbot and Jessica had an affair, but it doesn't actually like sound like they slept together. I don't think that's what's implied necessarily. And I thought Bayard was a fantastic character. I'm not normally the biggest fan of the mystery novels where like, oh, the imprisoned suspect could be innocent and it's up to the detective to save the day, because that imprisoned suspect almost always turns out to be innocent, like 99% of the time that's the case. But I think in this book there really is the sense that Bayard could be guilty. If the stakes weren't so high for Davy, I think the cousins probably would go there, and have Bayard be guilty, but knowing their style. Remember, this is one of my rules on how to solve a mystery novel, is to know the author. The cousins wouldn't do that to Davy. What they actually do to him is much worse, but he doesn't know that. But anyway, Bayard is a fantastic character. You do get the sense that, yeah, he could have murdered Jessica, even though his personality isn't necessarily in line with murderer. He's very friendly, and despite his sort of defeated attitude, he is very lighthearted. When Dakin says Bayard should have been fried, it's actually very shocking, because the electric chair, is a particularly gruesome form of capital punishment, and to inflict that on someone like Bayard seems like just cruelly unimaginable, because Bayard is such a likable character. And I don't necessarily think he comes off as sympathetic, but the reader is never meant to feel sorry for him. And I think this is because of this attitude a lot of mystery writers from the Golden Age had, where the justice system can do no wrong and the innocent don't suffer. So even though Bayard is innocent and been in prison for over a decade, we don't see him suffer. We're told he's miserable and defeated and he's given up, proving his innocence, but we don't really see that of him. We see a more lighthearted man who jokes about how he can easily escape out of handcuffs, and how he's like fully motivated to prove his innocence for Davy and for Linda and not for himself. The happy ending of this novel is not his happy ending, it's the happy ending for Davy and Linda. And we're even told Bayard was pardoned, which is not the same thing as having his conviction overturned in the courts and being proved innocent in a court of law. And we don't get any future plans from Bayard, as if his continued existence is going to be very similar to his life in prison. Like, he's going to be doing nothing, basically. He's going to be watching over Davy and not being able to lead his own life. Not that he has any life to live. Like, he has no wife, he has no business, he has no estate. He has the house, I suppose, but that's probably part of the estate. But that's it. I just also want to mention that we don't have an adaptation of this novel, so I'm using The original book cover, this is the original US book cover I'm using on the screen for when I talk about the individual characters. And I don't like this original book cover. If you can look at it, if you're listening, if you're watching on YouTube and not just listening, the original book cover appears to show Bayard strangling Jessica, which doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why they did this. Like, Jessica wasn't strangled, and that's very clearly not Davy. That's clearly Bayard. So I don't know why they did that, but I don't like the original book cover. So just giving my few thoughts on that. And we have Linda, who I think is the weakest character in the novel. She's very one dimensional in that, she's the good wife to Davy, his caretaker. She exists solely for him, and we don't know anything about her other than that she's like Davy's wife and she loves him despite everything. She's very smart, I guess, but we know almost nothing about her independently from Davy. And part of that is simply logistics. Linda doesn't really play any role of the events 12 years prior. She was even younger than Davy. She doesn't live in the house. There really wasn't like a lot for her to do in the past. And while she's an important figure in the present, she doesn't have a lot to do there either. And even her friendship with Alvin Kane gets sidelined pretty quickly. And I think we're supposed to believe Linda is faithful to Davy. That is reinforced throughout the novel. And I liked Linda. I didn't think she was a bad character. I just think that she needed to have more to do. And we have Alvin Kane, and his last name is everything you need to know about him. However, unlike the biblical Cain, he is not a murderer, but still a loathsome individual. His brazen attempts to split up Davy and Linda really knows no boundaries. I mean, we don't get confirmation of this, but it had to be him who sent those newspaper clippings to Davy when he was away in the war. Just such a slimy individual, and we're told he will face charges for that break-in and framing of Bayard, trying to steal the wife of a soldier. It's really extremely despicable thing to do. And there was a word for men like that. They call them Jodies. And we're also told he's been after Linda since she was a child, and he's much older than her, so that's gross. It's intentionally so. That's not like some weird thing going on. Like, I think the cousins do that purposely to make him even more despicable. And Alvin Kane was definitely a punching bag for the cousins. He's symbolic of this sort of like unpatriotic American of the day. Not necessarily those like critical of the war effort, but those taking advantage of the war effort by like swooping in on someone else's wife and framing people for murders they were already convicted of. We're also told he's very rude to the likes of like Miss Aiken and Miss Dupre. Kane is sort of this new generation in town, the shop owner who doesn't hold the same loyalty to his customers as the old one did. This is sort of symbolic of the change that's coming in society and in towns like Wrightsville. And I thought Alvin Kane was a much needed villain here. There's no true murderer in this book, so we don't have like the true villain of the novel. So then that role does go to Alvin Kane as our main, I guess, supporting antagonist. He's not really a main character. But I do think this sort of evil presence was needed in this novel. And finally, we have Sergeant Howie, who wasn't in it a lot, but he left a big impact. I mean, major comic relief here. I mean, the scene of him jumping around in his long johns and thinking he's king is just so ridiculous. Everyone thinks he's a joke. There are even times when, like, Dakin and Hendrix are, like, just telling him to shut up. And Ellery finds it funny that he has a wife, which is, like, totally mind blown by that. He's definitely, like, the doofus of the police department. And he sometimes treats, like, Bayard and even, like, the other characters very poorly and, like, starts screaming at them for no reason. And even Dakin's like, yo, chill out, bro. And he just, like, cannot command the respect he craves. Even his superiors give more respect to, like, the convicted criminals than they do to him, which is really funny. But overall, he's not supposed to be, like, a bad person. Like, I don't think we're supposed to, like, hate him necessarily. I thought he was a lot of fun. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of The Murderer is a Fox, one of my favorite Queen novels. I did hear back from some of you who did read this book and also loved it, which makes me very happy to hear. Next week, I am back into the world of mystery subgenres with a deep dive into the always popular locked room mystery. This will be locked room / impossible crime. They're not really the same thing. I'll explain that next week. So until next time, Mystery Files.